So one of the first things that's like really interesting is Agile was really kind of born within defense, a lot of the concepts. So Dr. Jeff Sutherland, our founder, was an F4 Phantom pilot in Vietnam, a West Point graduate. So a lot of the early ideas that started to formulate in Scrum, and being a fighter pilot, John Boyd goes back into his history, who is one of the greatest fighter pilots of all time, who defined a thing called the OODA loop, which is observe, orient, decide, and act. And one of the things Boyd decided or determined, it wasn't the best pilot with the best machine that would win in a dogfight, was a person who could make decisions faster than the enemy could react.
Hi, and welcome to Digital Leaders Club. I'm Guillaume Duchesneau from Engeno. This show is built for the leaders running real-world operations, and today that means the people working inside one of the most significant defense modernization waves the sector has seen in a generation. I'm joined by Matthew Jacobs, Chief Product Officer of Consulting at Scrum Inc., the firm founded by one of the co-creators of Scrum, Dr. Jeff Sutherland. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. Excited to be here.
All right. So before we get into, because you work a lot with defense players, right? So before we jump into that, how did you end up doing work with defense in general in a, let's say, agile consulting company like yours?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. So I'll talk a little bit about the history of Agile and defense, and then I'll talk a little bit of how we ended up playing kind of a large position within that. So one of the first things that's like really interesting is Agile was really kind of born within defense, a lot of the concepts. So Dr. Jeff Sutherland, our founder, was an F4 Phantom pilot in Vietnam, a West Point graduate. So a lot of the early ideas that started to formulate in Scrum, and being a fighter pilot, John Boyd goes back into his history, who is one of the greatest fighter pilots of all time, who defined a thing called the OODA loop, which is observe, orient, decide, and act. And one of the things Boyd decided or determined, it wasn't the best pilot with the best machine that would win in a dogfight, was a person who could make decisions faster than the enemy could react. And then they could drive the course of the engagement. You hear this all the time as a sports analogy of you want to play your game, not the other person's game. That's an example of being inside of someone's OODA loop. As he kind of moved into industry, he took a lot of those thinkings from defense, combined it with his study of microbiology and his medical research background, and then was actually working on the original ATM network rollouts, which actually has a very symbiotic relationship to how a cancer cell would spread in a human body. How do you think about network theory? So all they did is they were working on these complicated topics is spend a lot of time looking at the research of what makes a really effective delivery, bringing in their own experiences, such as Jeff's being a pilot, and then in each time box, because a sprint didn't exist, because they hadn't invented Scrum yet, how could they get better? And these ideas started to build on themselves and were really research-based from the very beginning. Today, now if you look at kind of Agile and Scrum in defense, there's thousands of US Scrum teams, really focused kind of at the individual team level. We were invited to kind of the UK to run a workshop to look at how could they write policy in a much more agile way. That little workshop opened up a huge opportunity because they wrote that policy in a really different way. So instead of sitting there and trying to write thousands of pages and hiding kind of the defense strategy from everyone until it was unveiled, they actually wrote a framework for it. Like, what would this thing even be? And they started shopping around with customers. What do you like? What jives, and getting feedback. Then they started building out the individual pieces, constantly getting feedback from within their organization, from the prospective customers. So by the time this thing was written, it was immediately well received and accepted because everyone already knew what was going to be in it. It already had the customer's perspective built in. And because they built it from a framework to the pieces out, getting constant feedback along the way, it wasn't like they dropped the entire thing, got feedback, and then had to rewrite it. They were able to adapt and evolve it with much less effort over the entire course. And like most strategic reviews where teams spend months kind of working on it and then spend 4 weeks crammed into a dark room in a small team trying to get it done because like the timeline's approaching, they were able to work on this actually in more of a flow-based manner and a continuous level of effort. That got the Navy thinking, the British Navy at this point in time, how would this apply to other types of work? So that kicked off actually a larger kind of agile transformation within the British Royal Navy. One of the things that I think is really interesting as a non-defense focused business is defense itself is very much a network because of the staff rotations. And you didn't really need like a go-to-market commercial strategy. People who had positive experiences working in a different environment due to their staff rotations would come to a new environment and see the immediate applicability and want to bring it with them. So you actually got this very natural kind of expansion of Agile within the UK Ministry of Defense.
So it sounds like your firm was kind of born in defense somehow. It was not kind of a accidental encounter with one firm that was in defense and then you grew up there. It seems like it was in the early beginning of the firm, right?
Yeah, and a lot of the ideas, if we continue to expand on kind of like Agile and defense, that are core components, like small multidisciplinary teams, like that is a very
Mm.
defense way of operating. If you look at every special forces team, command intent, which is I'm going to give you an outcome, you figure out the how, and you need to be able to do that because the complexity and involving situation kind of in a battle space is so complex. I can never tell you exactly how to get something done. You need to trade space to adapt as you go. And the entire idea of servant leadership also comes to defense. And the idea of mission command of what can I do as command to enable you to do your job? These are all very defense focused concepts. What I think is really interesting is a lot of these concepts are really embedded into the normal ops rhythm of operations, but not actually how they survive and operate kind of on base or on the business side of defense. And that's where we see kind of the biggest piece of opportunity. But for years, we didn't play very much in the defense space. And kind of
Mm.
defense was, I think you could argue, to use your own terminologies, calling us back home because there's such a emotional kind of connection at that level. Because a lot of people who are used and really enjoyed the way they would operate on operations, and we're trying to recreate that feeling and how do they do defense. So they saw Agile and were like, wait, that actually feels really natural to me.
Mm. Nice. So, Matthew, tell me now and our listeners about Scrum Inc. and your role at the company. What do you do exactly? Your website calls it a boutique consulting firm focused on end-to-end transformation. So, what does that mean from a day-to-day perspective, and how does it serve the bigger mission?
Yeah, so we were founded originally to help people work with Jeff Sutherland to kind of go back to the roots of like really what was Scrum. There's a lot of bad Scrum information out there. When sometimes I say I work for Scrum Inc., I always pause for a second to see how the person they either react really excitingly, like, well, I've been on a Scrum team, I love that, or oh my God, don't talk to me about Scrum. There's just, and I totally get it. Like, if you just follow sheepishly all the processes, or worse, like 40% of the processes with no idea of the outcome, it can have a really negative effect on the team. That doesn't mean there's something wrong with Scrum because there's a big difference between strategy and execution.
Mhm.
A lot of times I would say the issue is actually not the strategy being the issue, the execution of how it's applied is the issue. But if we look at kind of Scrum Inc., though, it evolved very much to be actually back to the routes of like what Jeff was doing in the beginning, which wasn't trying to make Scrum teams, he was trying to deliver effective product. So as an organization, we're really focused on creating the world's best delivery engine for your organizational strategy. Scrum, Agile concepts, user-centered design, it doesn't matter. Those are tools in our quiver. They're never really the point.
Mm.
No organization wakes up one morning and says, we want to be the most agile organization in the world, and that's our goal.
That's a
Like,
means
no, they
to an
want
end,
to,
right? It's a means to an
yeah,
end. It's not the end
it's
itself.
a, yeah. And I think in a lot of these failed transformations, it became the end point in the way people were talking. And then it ended up becoming the end point, and people totally lost track of what was their original why. Why do they care about this, what they were trying to do? So we work with a lot of organizations to deliver their strategy. And when we're working with everyone, we spend a lot of time coming back to will this thing help us deliver? Or do we think this thing will help us deliver? To keep reminding people the goal of your transformation isn't the transformation. The goal is to be able to do something. And I think the same issues happen every day in digital transformations as well. It's like, oh, the goal is to use AI more. That's not the goal.
Nah, that's not a goal. I agree. I agree. So, Matt, tell me, what's the part of your work right now that you're the most proud of, right? Something your team has built or some work you've delivered with your customers. So tell me about that.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that we've really been looking at and defining is as we've been working with organizations on transformations, we realized one of the reasons why we were more successful, and this wasn't necessarily intentional, it was just based on our training, is we took a really agile approach to the way we do transformation. We're not going to pre plan the entire organization, try to move the strategy around, and then maybe at the end even look back to see what we accomplished. No, we're going to try to take a very experimental, like human beings are complex creatures. Then you add the complication and system dynamics of lots of human beings working together. You cannot simulate that. We can actually come up with good concepts, but we don't know until we do something. So how do we actually take the transformation and deliver it in incremental bits where we're learning and adjusting based as we go? This led to the kind of the idea of the continuous transformation. If you look at a lot of the agile, especially scaling frameworks, they always have this built-in continuous feedback loop built into it. If we're doing that really well, we get into a state of constant evolution instead of going from major transformation program that was partially implemented at best 5 years later, massive upheaval transformation. Why don't we get into a state where actually bottoms or edge out feedback is getting fed back to the center of the organization so the organization is continuously evolving? This has led to, I think, a concept that's really been interesting is, all right, what is allowing us to approach the transformation in an agile way? It's actually this further step in logic, which is your organization itself is a product.
Mm.
So who's in charge of that product? How do we use the leading product thinking to design our products? And a lot of times we're helping an organization do what I would call a full stack transformation. And what that means is, let's think about this from kind of goal down. So like, what is the organizational strategy? If that's not well defined, I can't design an organizational transformation about how we operate because I'm designing how I operate to lead to some sort of outcome.
Yeah.
So the first piece you got to really nail down is like, why does the organization exist?
Yeah.
Now I can actually build a product structure of like, these are the products, and then map an organizational structure that mimics the products we're trying to build. So like taking that Conway's view, but into the organizational design up front, that's my hardware layer. And we're drawing a lot more organizations like system schematic diagrams because actually they start to map really nicely on top of each other. Now I've got to lay a software layer over, which is really like governance and process. And how do I maintain the minimum viable amount of that? There's a real power is now where the edge compute is, which is actually the ways of working at the team level and the individual level.
Hmm.
Then finally, underneath that, I need enabling technology and culture. And what's interesting is if I have an issue at any layer within that continuum, I should look one layer up for what the root cause is. If I have an issue at culture, I shouldn't try to change culture. I think that's a fool's errand. It's like pushing against a rope. It will keep bending and shifting. I can't tell people to be more collaborative. What I can do is look at, all right, what's in the system that's driving that behavior?
Mm.
And then adjust the system to get the culture that I want. So I think this idea of the full stack transformation and treating your organization like a product has actually a lot of levers that we haven't fully even pulled on or fully discovered yet. But I think there's a lot of power in getting organizations to realize that their organization is a product and someone needs to own it. And then they can apply a lot of these leading thinking practices to their own organization.
That's super interesting. And typical question after that for me, and you kind of surfaced it, but what's the hardest part of leading transformation, especially in defense sector? You're in the US, we're in Canada. So in Canada, what we see is that that sector is super behind in terms of technology, modern technology adoption and AI. Maybe you could tell us about on the south part of the border. But, yeah. So what's the hardest part when you are in front of maybe, let's say, more conservative organizations in terms of technology adoption?
Well, I think the hardest part is the question like, well, how do you know? Bring me more data, bring me more scenarios, bring me more. They want a level of definition and proof that everything you're going to do is going to work. What I find ironic about that point of view is they fundamentally already agree with what they're doing does not work. So the threshold is actually quite low. It's like, do we think this could be better? And what is the safest level test we can do to see if it's better? So I think the
Mm,
hard part is dealing with the uncertainty. When you talk about technology adoption, one of the things I find very ironic, and I know this to be true kind of in Canada as well, there's like pockets of extraordinarily advanced things going on.
mhm,
And like the government has some like amazing technology doing totally edge breaking stuff. Yet to like get on a base, like someone is like hand scrolling through 1,000 line Excel trying to look people up. So like there's a paradoxical problem
mhm,
that exists that I'm not actually fully sure of what the root cause is, but I have a feeling a lot of it has to do with this like demanding to know and be comfortable up front with the accountability standpoint of it's public funds. In a
yeah.
business, you've got a revenue line and a cost line. And I can tell you, like, if a product line area wanted to make this investment and they said in 2 years that they think it would do X, I know that for sure. One of the problems in government, and I think especially in defense, if you're not actively in a war, is how did you really know that you increase the outcome, that I've
Mm,
increased government, Canada's defense as an apparatus? It's very, very hard to do.
yeah.
So you get this very status quo bias because you also cannot get fired for maintaining the status quo.
Yeah, the KPI to measure outcome is hard to it's not dollars, right? It's something else, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And
So
dollars are very easy. Cost is very easy.
yeah, exactly.
Measuring total defense, very hard.
Absolutely, absolutely. So in the US, in Canada, at our own scale, so investment in defense is huge. Like billions and billions are now injected in defense. So from where you sit, what is genuinely changing inside the defense ecosystem?
So both in the UK, where I spent a lot of time in the US, they're very much aligned and starting to make this transition that industry started making probably in earnest 10 years ago. And it's actually still accelerating to today. This like idea of transitioning from project type thinking to product type thinking.
Mm,
So if you look, the US just kicked off the warfighter acquisition system transformation last year, which is to collapse a lot of that value stream of capability development together. Stop funding huge programs that may deliver in 10 years, but like, how do you fund the next piece and then the piece after that to field capability quicker? And both governments are talking a lot about speed. We need to get speed of capability to the warfighter's hands so we know that the stuff is working. The problem is you're pushing against 50 plus years of conservatism, where the answer is I'd rather just deliver something big once in 10 years and make potentially a massive risk at the end instead of taking lots of micro risks throughout. So I think that's kind of the big push of like, how do I move from project to product or capability type thinking,
mm,
which then starts to open other doors. Both the US and the UK are very interested in the idea of a portfolio. The second I go from thinking about individual programs to a portfolio of programs and capabilities is I could invest in three things that do the same thing very intentionally and then choose the one that works best. Or I can allocate to, all right, where's the biggest need now instead of having every program individually treated like that is the program in isolation that needs to be funded to be able to get to the end. So even this like portfolio level thinking gives you a lot more options to be like, actually, there may be multiple ways to solve from getting quite literally from point A to point B in a contested environment. I could fly, I could drive, I could barrel underground, maybe I could teleport. But if I actually own that portfolio of troop movement, I have the ability to flex up and down based on what we're learning. If I treat all of those like independent things from each other, I may actually be continuing to invest in path B, C, and D that are just no longer needed.
So do you mean by that, like focus more on the outcome rather than on the work to be done? Or is that kind of the
Yeah, very much so. Like, why deliver? And there's like failed technology investment after failed technology investment in the UK and the US, and I assume Canada, these big programs that didn't deliver, or they delivered exactly what they said they were going to deliver, probably late and over budget, but we'll ignore that. But then, like, it hit the warfighter, and they're like, I don't want this. Or I wanted this 10 years ago. I no longer need this. So thinking much more of like, how do I get to speed? How do I get what we need now while keeping an eye kind of out on the future? And what's the problem we're trying to solve? So Ajax was a tank that's written about in the press. Like it had a kind of a defined mission set, but then they tried to define every requirement. This thing cost billions and billions of dollars, sunk cost fallacy. We're going to keep investing in it. And by the time this thing's hit market, they're already unwinding it. It didn't actually solve a need that mattered anymore. And actually, they hit their requirements like speed, maneuverability, etc. But it actually didn't fill the capability gap that they were aiming at.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Now on the human level, so getting people genuinely productive inside a defense program that is outcome oriented with all compliance, the security reviews, the approval chains, and all of the constraints that defense bring. What does it look like inside the organizations you work with?
I think it's getting people to focus on the outcome, work together instead of treating this thing like in its assembly line where I do this step, you do the next step, then you do that next step. That actually breaks people from actually concentrating on what the overall goal is. Like, what are we collectively trying to deliver next for this program and bringing that outcome oriented thinking? Also, I think in defense, because there are a lot of very strong individuals, the question is always, how can I make that person more effective? The thing that's slowing that person down is the broader system. We need to be creating a system that allows them to be effective towards a goal that's defined, which is not a task or a process step. It's actually what we're trying to deliver. So it's actually rethinking the organizations that these people operate in and the system to allow them the freedom to act. I think on top of that, once you start creating a system that can evolve, is helping the people because they've been in the system where they're getting rewarded because so and so knows how to work around the system. If I get a system that's working, the system should be working for them. That's having anyone who's rewarded for working around the system lets you know your system doesn't work. The inverse though is once I've got a system that evolves, I need to like remind people that the system can change. We're seeing this right now where actually the governments are actually ahead on the policy standpoint, but people are scared to use it. They don't know it exists or try to fit the old way of working into the new policy that gives them much more flexibility because they're nervous or they're not used to the system actually changing. So getting them to realize that the world is changing and they have the ability to change the system to enable what they're actually trying to accomplish. So
Hmm.
I think it's first, you've got to change the system, but you've got to do it based on feedback from the individuals. And then you've got to help the individual realize they're not in this fixed mindset, constrained environment, that they have some flexibility, agency, and trade space to really focus on the outcome because they've been trained about to really focus on your piece, your individual task. Don't worry about the outcome. Well, now we want them to focus on the outcome. We need to work with them to get them comfortable and show, hey, what are our tools and levers in that area now?
And how hard is it for people to switch how their brains are wired to being outcome driven?
Well, I think everybody shows up at work. No one joined a defense prime or the government to be a compliance officer and just move through pre-setted steps and like suck their brain out from individual thinking. Everyone wants to be outcome oriented. It's been trained out of them over time, or they got so tired from fighting the system that they've got their little ways that they ensure that they help towards the outcome, but don't get fired in the meantime. So it's a learned behavior over time. It's not what an individual wants. So I think the first step is like reminding them of that, like, what are you really here for? What do you want to do? And then showing them that there are new tools and then reinforcing it and then showing them that it's real. Because the other thing is they've all been part of 10, 15, 20 failed transformations over time that this is going to be great for you. We're going to make you so much more efficient. And it was all about kind of putting something on them. It was never like, what anyone was going to do for them.
Mm.
You got to show them that this time is going to be different. And that takes building trust between the individual and the organization, the transformation in the organization and the individual, and capturing those wins and vignettes and building momentum. This isn't a one-time event. Again, back to capability and outcome thinking. I should be thinking of my transformation the same way.
So interesting. Do you see as the biggest opportunity for defense organizations right now? I mean, how can they leverage technology? First, maybe let me first ask you this question. How is, let's say, modern technology and AI adoption going in the US for, let's say, the government and the let's say the military aspect of it, but also with in let's say the big primes and maybe other subcontractors. How is it adopted as of now?
So I think this question needs to be broken into two very distinct parts. And when we're working with private organizations, we also break it always into these two parts. How is AI being incorporated into the things that you actually do? So if I'm building a cybersecurity product, how much AI is in that product? Separate question from how am I using AI to build that?
Right.
So there's a lot of AI like in the field, in the technology that is actually being delivered to the warfighter. I think there's opportunity to do significantly more and continue to accelerate it, but I don't think that's where the biggest gap is.
Mm.
I think the real accelerant is, all right, how do we change what we're doing with AI? I'd say on the US government
You mean
side,
internally? You mean yourself as an organization?
internally.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And if you look at the US government, they're really doing a good job of starting to push it out and making the different tools for the individual available. I think now it's focusing on, right, helping people not learn how to use it. It's actually one of the most user-friendly systems ever created by humankind. It's literally a
Mhm.
blank screen and you can ask it to do whatever you want.
Exactly.
Is showing them how they can use it in their individual role and showing them use cases that are context specific so they get comfortable. The other thing is, though, what you don't want everybody doing is automating a bunch of systems and processes that shouldn't exist in the first place. There's an organization that we've done a bunch of work with where, as we stepped in and looked at their AI adoption, the first process piece that they've actually really automated leveraging I would say shouldn't exist in the first place. But let's ignore that. It is a compliance-based activity that fundamentally should not be there. And I'm almost positive the rules and regulations actually don't specifically say you have to do it this way. But let's put that aside. There's a lot of AI going up until the approval process. What they have done is made the bottleneck worse because they're producing a lot more compliance artifacts and then there's still a human approver kind of in the loop. So I actually didn't get system flow. All I did was accelerate into the next choke point. And now there's more of it sitting on those individuals. I've got to redesign the processes to be built with speed. I also, in an agile land, people talk a lot about velocity, not speed. And that's not just like a turn of phrase. I think it's a really important intentional word choice from Jeff Sutherland. Velocity means speed in a direction. I can go really fast. And there's lots of organizations where people feel busy as hell. And you look at them and say they're like, look at healthcare. It's like extraordinarily busy people. And no one would say the system's really efficient because what they have speed, not velocity. I need to get people
Mm.
moving in the right direction and with continuous flow. So I need to change the system that those people work in to enable that flow-based delivery. And I think a lot of that then is, all right, how do I remove handoffs?
So let's say I'm a big company in defense right now, and I knock to your door and I say, Matt, please help me adopt AI. Help me use AI for our own internal productivity. Where do you start?
My first question would be why? And
B-
obviously they want to be more productive. But let's step back. Like, where is the organization? What's working really well today? Where do we have issues? Let's use the AI to focus on kind of where we have issues. And then I think we need to step back. And there's a large company we're working with right now who originally called us and was like, should we be investing in Agile, AI, or Lean? And my answer was like, these aren't competitive ideas from each other. To actually leverage I need to be in a very agile organization who can adjust, and my processes, I should be trying to lean out and then using AI to accelerate through that leaned out process. I don't want to accelerate and automate a process that's already broken because then I just do the bad thing faster. That's not the point. So for any of them, and we're working with a large defense prime at the moment, it's first identifying kind of what are my actual products that I'm providing? How do I need to organize around it? How do I create human-based flow? How do then I help the teams, if we're not already organized in teams, adopt AI and a human machine pairing to go fast to execute the organizational strategy, which then means I need a way to test cascade what we'd call the golden thread, which is the organization strategy, and decompose that so every individual knows how their action affects that strategy. And they have the trade space to then figure out the how.
Tell me the typical good and bad whys for AI adoption. So you said I come to you, I want to adopt AI, I want to transform with AI, and you said, I would ask you first, why do you want to do that? So what are you hearing typically?
So the two answers that make me want to kind of step back and work with them that I think are red herrings to me is I want to be more efficient. I think most organizations don't have huge efficiency problems. They have effectiveness problems. So like especially if you're doing knowledge based work, like usually the issue if we even if we just look at coding is not how many lines of code they can write a minute. It's actually that they're working, they're empowered and it's moving towards like the general strategy. It's not how many people like if you were writing poetry, like the efficiency of writing poetry is like a dumb concept.
Yeah.
Like efficiency and knowledge work, like I should only worry about efficiency if I'm not being effective. And the only reason I'm not being effective is I'm not getting enough work through my really effective system. Now I can worry about efficiency. So I think my first thing is to push them from efficiency thinking to effectiveness. The second is it's because I want to get rid of a lot of individuals. Usually, organizations today, especially good ones that are growing, they have more that they want to do than they're capable of doing. It's actually, no, how can I reposition people to be able to do those other things? Like the second you're immediately jumping to, I want to reduce headcount, saying there's actually not that much for my organization to do. If we could just do what we're doing today with less people, that's the answer. And it lets me say you're actually not that valued of a company or in a very growth type or setup,
Mm,
or you're missing that person is not there to see kind of that broader opportunity. We need to make sure we see that broader opportunity. I don't mean that never would that reduce headcount or change the type of person in my organization. But my first question is should be how can I do more?
yeah.
What else can I be doing? Because if your customers are not perfectly satisfied today, why are you rushing to rip out cost instead of provide more value to your customer?
If you could fix one thing about how defense sector operates digitally today, what would it be?
Digital to me is just an enablement piece. I think getting where I would focus digital is getting rid of as much reporting as possible so humans can spend more time talking about the actual work instead of reporting. I heard an expression that I had never heard the other day. And that's like, it kind of made me feel bad. In some jobs, you do reporting to show that you're making progress so you can continuously doing the work. Some jobs you do reporting so you can create space to do the work. There's a lot of people, and we hear over and over again, what percent of your work goes to doing work versus talking about the work you could be doing or reporting? We hear over and over again, 80% of my effort goes toward talking about the work, reporting on the work, and 20% goes into value add activities. Especially as you move up in the organization, that number gets worse and worse. And probably in the middle, it maxes out at that 80-20 is talking about the work and briefing about the work versus actually moving anything forward. So if we can leverage digital footprints to get to shared data, shared understanding, to be able to provide more context to push down decisions, I think that can really accelerate things. But I should not be just creating data so I could push up more information so someone further from the work can make the decision instead of actually solving the real problem, which is just allowing the person closer to the work to have the context to be able to make an effective right decision.
All right, Matt, we're almost at time. So before I let you go, quick lightning round. Just first thing that comes to mind, no overthinking, just how it goes, right?
Yep.
So the one technology or capability you genuinely think will change a sector in the next few years. You cannot just say AI.
Well, I don't think anyone understands what the next 5 years really looks like if you look at kind of the way Ukraine's operating and what we're actually seeing right now in the Persian Gulf. I
Mm,
think it's not about choosing the winner. It's about deploying as many options as possible and seeing what sticks and actually evolves. Like human evolution and evolution doesn't work by the species deciding, oh, do you know what would be great if we grew wings? Like, no, someone grew wings and it started to working and evolve. So I actually think the real technology is how do we get more pull based or market based experimentation into this digital technology because there's going to be more and more of it. How do I
love it.
suss out what's working and what's valuable faster?
I love that. Best example you've seen of a defense organization executing well on a transformation.
I think right now, because the pace of change and some of the transformation, both in the US and the UK, are so high, it's forcing people to step back and question how they do transformation and going through structured processes to organize, to kind of minimize flow, to like build products. So I'm not going to name anything specific, but I think actually, if you look at the top end strategies of where a lot of the governments are going now, if they can execute 30% of what they're saying they want to do, they're on the right path. Now they need to put the resources in realizing it's not strategy. That's the trick. It's the execution.
Mm.
So how do I put as much rigor into executing what I spent a lot of time deciding I was going to do? So I'll leave it at that.
All right. All right. Matt, this was a super valuable conversation. Really appreciate how thoughtful you were and how candid you were. It was a lot of fun for me. I hope it was also for you. This is exactly what this show is about.
Can I ask one follow-up lightning round question to you?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
What is your one big kind of takeaway from this conversation that you may think about later today?
I would say being, let's say, becoming outcome based, right? Instead of thinking about what work should I do, is more like what is the end goal I'm treading towards. I think that's one of the main aspects you emphasized today.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that.
All right. Thank you, Matt.
All right. Thank you. Bye.